Okay.
Okay, now I'm gonna make
And
it cold. There you go.
all right, so let me, okay, so yeah, it's not letting me record myself kind of thing. I think it's okay, so yeah, like if you know how to get it, you'll probably have to send it to my email the same way I kind of sent it to you
Yeah, I
type
know
thing.
how to. Yeah, I know how to get it. I'm putting it in the cloud.
Perfect. All right, cool. So let me just share my screen and we can move on. So entire screen and share sound because I have some videos. Share. All right. Is that showing up the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yep. All right. All right. So, all right. So this will be part 2 on the Shroud. This is the second week, kind of looking at the scientific evidence from the Shroud of Turin. And just to kind of recap, if there's anyone that's new this week, what we covered last week was just kind of an introduction, what is the Shroud? As well, we looked at the scientific team, STIRP, and what they discovered about the Shroud images. What are the properties that make it so remarkable? And why is it a mystery to scientists today? And I've highlighted about 8 of them. So the first is that the photonegativity, basically the lights and the darks of the images have been reversed, as well as the left and the rights have been reversed, like in a mirror. And that's what we call the photonegativity. And there's also 3-dimensional information encoded into the lights and darks of the image. So the darker the image, that means it was closer to the cloth. The lighter the color of the image, that means it was further away from the cloth at the time of image formation. And that translates into an accurate 3-dimensional form of a human being. There's also body image uniformity. So that means that each individual fibril that has color on it in terms of the body images, they're colored to the exact same uniform degree. So that it's all the same color intensity of that straw yellow color. Now, just to clarify, well, how does that make sense? Were you just saying there's lighters? Oh, sorry. Wasn't I just saying that there's lighters and darker areas in the Shroud images? Yes, but that's not because any individual fiber is colored darker than another. It's just based on the quantity of colored fibrils in one area versus another. So that's what creates the lights and darknesses. Every fibril is uniform. Also, there's body image superficiality. So we said it's only colored on the topmost layer, the primary cell wall of each fiber. And each fiber is smaller than the diameter of a human hair. We also covered that, and this was one that I don't think you guys kind of got, so we're going to re-go over this again, but the images followed a vertical projection path. So whatever caused the images traveled from the body to the cloth in a straight line up direction for the frontal image and a straight line down from the body to the cloth for the backside images. And then finally, there's no paints or pigments or dyes that STIRP found for the images. The bloodstains have been proven to be made of real blood, and there's no body images underneath the bloodstains. They terminate precisely at the edge of the bloodstains there. So yeah, just before I get into today's lesson, is there any questions about that recap? Are you guys remembering what we took up last week? Yep. Okay. All right, cool. So
Dale,
oh
sorry.
yeah. No
So
problem.
what is the significance of no body images under the blood stains? What's significant about that?
So it can speak to how the images were formed. And in the first place, a lot of STIRP scientists believe that because there's no body images under the bloodstains, that means that the bloodstains were formed first on the cloth, and then the bloodstains interfered with whatever caused the body images. So that's why no body images formed in the areas of the bloodstains. It was just where it was blank cloth. So yeah, it's gonna help us adjudicate on which hypotheses or explanations work or not. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question.
Yep.
And does that clarify that the body was not washed before it was wrapped in the shroud?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So in pro shroud circles,
So they
there's
probably.
oh sorry.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you very much.
So there are three positions. Some people think that the body wasn't washed at all. And I just interviewed a blood expert named Dr. Kelly Kearse, and this is his position. And the reason for that is there are clearly blood stains reflecting angles when Jesus was up on the cross and his arms were outstretched. They reflect angles whereby, it was when he was up on the cross. It wasn't blood stains when they took his body down and put him in the tomb. So some people think that, okay, the body wasn't washed at all. Others think that the body must have been washed because it would just be a bloody mess, right? Like it would be kind of like a Band-Aid. There would be smudged blood everywhere if you didn't wash him at all. But there are some experts like Gilbert Lavoie who think that. I myself take a position in the middle. I think there was a partial washing. So some of the scourge wounds I think were washed, but they didn't have time to do a full washing because they were in a rush to, get Jesus prepared before sundown on the Sabbath day. And, they couldn't finish. So that's why they had to leave the body. And then the women returned on Sunday to finish the job and that sort of thing. So there's three positions, and I take the one in the middle. I think there was a partial washing.
My reason for asking that is because in the Jewish culture, when someone dies, the rabbi and the undertaker, someone stays with the body until the rabbi and the undertaker comes, and that body is not washed. They take it away. My former employee was a nurse, and I worked with Jewish patients. And when they died, we did not wash them. The other bodies we washed and shrouded them ourselves, but the Jewish rabbi and undertaker, they took over the body. And that's why I asked that question about the blood stains and not the body, Christ's body not being washed.
Yeah, excellent question. And so that's an excellent point too. The one thing I would just say, remember one thing, right? So modern Jewish practices aren't necessarily the same as first century Jewish practices. And yeah, there are about 4 different Jewish burial practices in the first century, depending on the circumstances. So yeah, modern practices based on rabbinic Judaism, I would argue, didn't really come into play until the 2nd century after Jesus, and they started crystallizing over the centuries. So yeah, just because Jews do that today doesn't necessarily mean they have to do that back in the 1st century. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Cool. No worries. All right. So, oh, sorry. All right, cool. So let's get into today's lesson on how are the shroud images formed, and what are some of the theories that people have come up with to try and explain these remarkable images. And on that front, to frame it for this class, I'm going to look at what scientists have deemed the trichotomy rule. So this is the notion that there are 3 categories of explanation, 3 main types of explanation that one can appeal to explain anything, right? The fine-tuning of the universe, the information in DNA, whatever it is. There are 3 types of explanation. One, it could be due to random chance. Second, it could be due to natural law or regularities. And then thirdly, there's intelligent design. So these are the 3 categories, and there have been many attempts by shroud skeptics to appeal to these different types of explanation to try to explain the shroud's body and bloodstain images. So we're going to adopt this trichotomy rule as the format for evaluating various theories. And here's kind of just a snapshot. You don't have to memorize everything here, but I just kind of want to give you guys an idea, a visual idea of how many theories are out there in shroud research that have been proposed. So you have on the non-miraculous side, you have various artistic mechanisms that we'll be looking at. As well, you have, okay, Susan, ordinary natural mechanisms that we'll be looking at, things just involving a body left in the shroud. And then you have multiple supernatural or miraculous theories, right? So the one I'm going to be presenting today is going to be a radiation theory based on charged particles, but there are other options out there, you know, including corona discharge or ultraviolet radiation, X-ray radiation. That's Gary Habermas's favorite, for example. So there's a bunch of different theories. I just wanted you guys to have kind of a lay of the land on that front. But let's evaluate some. So the first option here is the random chance option. So let's say a shroud skeptic comes up to you and says, oh yeah, the shroud images, it's just random chance. They just popped into being, maybe from some kind of quantum fluctuation or something like that. Now in the first place, you might want to ask, okay, well, if that's true, why is it only the shroud images that popped into being out of nothing? Why not ice cream cones or automobiles or, you know, cell phones or something like that? Or heck, why not even the image, the Mona Lisa painting? Why didn't that just pop into existence? And I think we have to admit that this is a ridiculous option because Bill Dembski, he's in the intelligent design movement, and he's actually calculated what's called the universal probability bound. So what that means is that if any event or thing has odds of existing that are less than 1 divided by, let me just try to move this, 1 divided by 10 to the power of 150. So that means there's a chance less than 1 divided by 10 with 150 zeros following that. If the odds are less than that, it is statistically impossible for that event to happen by random chance. And guess what? When it comes to the shroud images, look, we have full frontal and backside images with detailed details, right? It clearly resembles Jesus in the Gospels. It's got his scourge wounds, crown of thorns, the chest wound. It clearly depicts a male, a human male, and that sort of thing. That is just impossible. The odds against that are way less than 1 divided by 10 to the power of 150. It's impossible for that to happen just by chance. Meaningful information doesn't get conveyed just through chance processes like that. And again, it's literally akin to thinking that the images on the Mona Lisa could just through random chance pop into existence, and that's just not believable. And thankfully, no shroud skeptics go for this kind of option there. So, yeah, I might get to move on with that. Any questions about the random chance option or? Nope. Okay. Yeah, I think that one's fairly obvious. Like I said, no shroud skeptic goes for that. But there are some shroud skeptics that go for the second option, where they look at natural laws and regularities to explain the shroud. So these appeal to ordinary natural mechanisms. Essentially what that is, look, you have a dead body, maybe covered in sweat or covered in myrrh and aloes or some kind of burial ointments, and you wrap that thing in a shroud and you leave it to the laws of nature, and somehow that will stain the cloth in one way or another and create these images. And that's what these ordinary natural theories are. And look, Reverend Sulu was telling me some of you are nurses and medical experts, so you will know that the body can leave stains on cloth and stuff like that, or linen or something like that. So that is plausible, at least at face value. And on this front, there are 2 main types. So the first is that, well, it was formed through direct contact. The cloth actually directly touched the body, and then that left this staining. The other is, you can say, well, maybe the cloth wasn't touching the body, at least not all over the place, but there was a gas diffusion. Gas is emitted from the dead body, and that stained the cloth and left the images. So those are the 2 main types here. how do these perform in terms of explaining the remarkable features we learned about last week? Well, you can see they can account for the photonegativity. These mechanisms do reproduce that feature, just accidentally. But it utterly fails when it comes to recreating three-dimensional images, as well as with body image uniformity. They're not uniform. It fails in terms of body image superficiality. And it also fails in terms of encoding those vertically aligned mapping process, and it gets a green check mark for everything else. So just to kind of give you some information, so in terms of the three-dimensionality, the STIRP team actually did experiments, as well as several other scientists, both in the lab and in the field, including one archaeologist named Eugenia Natowski, who conducted some experiments in Jerusalem, in tombs, to see, okay, in this environment, would a dead body create these images? But they couldn't recreate the three-dimensionality, because with direct contact, I mean, just think about it. It's either the image, the cloth is in contact with the body and there's an image, or it's not. It results in a binary process, and that doesn't reflect into three-dimensional images. Yeah, go ahead. Oh,
Yeah, somebody just coughed. That's all. Okay.
Okay. Okay, cool. So think about the three-dimensional has a fine gradation, right? Like if you think about your face, it's not just like, okay, hit or miss. You know, you either have contact or you don't have contact. No, like I have different elevations to the three-dimensionality of my face. The tip of my nose is higher than the side of my nose, and that's higher than my cheek, and stuff like that. So that there are different elevations, is what I want to say. And that reflects, if you want to depict a true three-dimensional face. Direct contact doesn't translate like that. If you throw it into a VP8 image analyzer, you basically get a hit or a miss. It doesn't recreate true three-dimensional information. And just to kind of show you, there's also this issue of non-contact zones. So this is kind of what I was trying. Some ProShred experts think this is the position of the body. And this is a hint that the body was actually in a state of rigor mortis at the time, because there is body image rigidity that is reflected in the shroud man's position. But you can see, like, for example, if the legs were raised this high, the bottom cloth is not going to be in direct contact, right? So there's going to be no image at all in this area. Or same with the small of the back, right? That's not touching the cloth of a naturally draped cloth. Or on the frontal image, the hands, it would create what's called a tent pole or a tenting effect, because the cloth would be draped here and it would miss, it wouldn't be touching certain areas here. Or if it's on the tip of the nose, the cloth might not be touching part of the side of the nose and stuff like that. So there are going to be non-contact zones. But on the shroud, all of these areas are fully imaged. So it's almost like whatever caused the image had to travel through the air to the cloth type deal. So I hope that makes sense, right? And in terms of a gas diffusion, okay, so let's picture a gas. Does that do any better with the three-dimensionality? Oh my gosh, it's even worse, because gases diffuse in all directions outwards. Imagine a gas coming out from a dead body. It's not going to just diffuse in a way to create 3D images. It's going to be a blur. It's going to go out in all directions. And I have an actual picture. This is the scientific experiments that was obtained by testing the gas diffusion. So here's the photonegative image. Does that look like the shroud? No, it's just a blurry image. And when you plug it into the VP8 image analyzer, this is the three-dimensionality. It looks nothing like a face. It's totally distorted. The eyes are sunken in. The nose is dilapidated. So this is just an utter failure. Gas diffusion doesn't do the trick. It can't reproduce three-dimensional info. All right. Hopefully. All right. Is that making sense so far to everyone?
Cool.
Yep. All right. Okay. And moving on, body image uniformity. Remember I said each individual fibril has the same intensity of color. Well, look at this. Does this look like it's the same intensity of color, the same all around? No, you've got bright areas and utterly dark areas. You either have contact or you have no contact that's causing an imprint. You don't have a uniformity of color. And what's more, think about on the backside image, that is going to be darker just due to the effects of gravity. If you have a body laying on a cloth and then it's wrapped around the cloth on the front side, the backside image is going to be far darker just due to the effects of gravity, pushing that body down onto the cloth and, giving more sweat and stuff in contact with the cloth itself. So you're going to fail uniformity. And same with superficiality, because this theory has to posit there's at least some level of decomposition that's happening for the gases to emit or for the body images to go on through direct contact. Well, those decomposition liquids are going to show up on the shroud. They're going to penetrate through capillary flow or action through the cloth. They're not going to be just on the superficial layer of the shroud. And the final one, here's the vertical alignment. So I'm going to kind of re-explain this because I know some people were having trouble last week. But look, through direct contact, this is just impossible to have these vertically aligned mapping distortions. And same with gases, because remember, gases are going to diffuse out in all directions equally. They're not going to just go straight up to the cloth or straight down from the back of the body to the dorsal side. And here's what I was showing you guys last week to try to depict this. And my apologies, I messed up. When I was answering your guys' question, I was answering a totally different question. So let me first say this. Yes, you guys are absolutely correct that this diagram is inaccurate in depicting the shroud kind of floating above the body. That isn't what we're saying on the pro shroud side. Obviously, it's going to be drape down and making contact with the shroud. Although there still will be some non-contact zones, right? Like the shroud, because of the tenting effect, the side of the nose might not be touching unless you press it in or something like that. But here's the important part. The shroud followed path P, this straight line vertical path. Okay, so that's what created the images. Now, if you had direct contact, that would result in path A, right? If the cloth folded down and touched this part of the nose, when you flatten the shroud out to look at the image, take it off the body and flatten it out, you're going to get a wider image. It's going to be path A. And the problem's even worse if you have a gas diffusion model. That would be path E. So here's kind of a helpful image to show you guys the problem, right? So here's the shroud following path P, the strictly vertical mapping process. But if you had a direct contact mechanism, this is how the image would look. It would be flattened out. You would have what scientists call this wraparound distortion effect, or otherwise known as the mask of Agamemnon, whereby if you wrap a shroud around a curved surface, and then the images form, and then you flatten that cloth out afterwards, it's going to be wider. The image is going to be wider. Does that make sense now to everyone, or? Yeah. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So obviously you can tell direct contact and gas diffusion we don't get these very widely distorted images. So that's why they're failures. They don't explain the shroud images. We don't get that vertical projection. Okay, cool. So if everyone's good to go, we can kind of move on then, right? So, okay, natural regularity fails, and also random chance can't explain the shroud images. So via the trichotomy rule, all that's left is intelligent design. Some kind of intelligent designer must have created these images. But the question is then, okay, well, if it is due to intelligent design, who the heck is the intelligent designer? Who designed these images? And this is where shroud skeptics will come in and they'll say, well, clearly it was a medieval human. Human beings are intelligent designers. And it was some medieval artist who designed these images as just some kind of artwork. And the other option is that no, they were formed miraculously. The intelligent designer was God, and he created these images through a miracle during the resurrection. So what does the scientific evidence support in terms of these two options? Okay, so this is by far the most popular version that shroud skeptics go for. They like to use and appeal to ordinary artistic mechanisms. And there have been about four main categories. We'll cover three of them here, but four main categories of explanation that are artistic in nature. So the first is the traditional painting hypothesis. You know, it's just a regular painting. Then there's kind of an offshoot where it's a powder rubbing. So instead of using a wet paint, they used kind of a powdered pigment and a statue or a bas relief, and then, you know, put the cloth over top of that. The next one is the scorch hypothesis. So they put the shroud over a statue or a bas relief, and then they applied heat, and that burnt the images or oxidized the cellulose onto the cloth. And then finally, we have my favorite, because it's the most out there, I would say, but it's called the proto-photo hypothesis. So remember I said last week that it would be ridiculous to think that medieval people had a concept of modern camera technology.
Mm.
Well, one shroud skeptic out there thinks that's not so preposterous, actually. I think he thinks they did know about camera technology through this thing called a camera obscura technique. So we'll be learning about that. Okay, so how do these theories perform? And just at a glance, you can see that traditional painting literally fails every single feature that we have on this first part. The other theories do a little bit better. They do explain the negativity. And when you're using a statue or a bas relief, that can encode partial three-dimensional information, but it's not a full three-dimensional image like we see with the shroud. So I gave it a questionable status on that front, just to benefit the shroud skeptic. But literally on everything else, it's a failure in terms of uniformity and superficiality. Same with the vertical alignment. None of the methods can reproduce that. And then obviously traditional painting would fail. If there's no paints on the shroud, it can't be painted, whereas the others will work on that front. All right, so any questions before I move on, or?
Where's the powder rubbing again?
So the powder rubbing is kind of, instead of using like a wet paint and a paintbrush, they'll apply a powdered pigment to a statue or a bas relief, and then they'll press the cloth down to that to create the images, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so as I said, the traditional painting hypothesis is an utter failure, essentially across the board, right? It's even questionable. It can't create negative images. The shroud is the only known, if it is a painting, it's the only known painting in existence that has this feature. And how would a medieval artist even think okay, I'm going to reverse the left and rights, and I'm going to reverse the darks and lights of the images, so that in the 19th century, when a guy takes a photo of the shroud, they'll be able to see the true photo positive image. That's just historically implausible. It's absurd to think that. As we saw, it's also impossible for a painting to create the three-dimensionality. Once again, no other photo or painting in history has the true three-dimensional image fact features that the shroud does.
Well,
And believe it or not, oh, go ahead. No questions. Okay. And they actually did experiments to test this. They used certified forensic artists, and they cheated. They gave them anchor points to help them to know, okay, which areas need to be darker versus lighter to create these 3D effects. And yet every single time these certified forensic artists failed to create true three-dimensional images with the VP8 image analyzer, like we see with the shroud. They just couldn't do it, even with the helpful anchor points helping them to know where they need to apply the proper shading. And the STIRP scientists attribute the failure is probably due to a combination of limited visual discernment of shading at low contrast and a lack of the proper hand-eye brain coordination ability to apply the correct shading values. In other words, it's just humanly impossible to paint the Shroud's three-dimensional images with a paintbrush. You can't do it.
I have a question.
Yep.
My question is, was there any test done on the cloth to determine what the substances were? Or was it too decay in order to get that evidence?
Absolutely. There were literally dozens upon dozens of tests to see. So in the first place, there was over a dozen spectral tests aimed at the cloth directly to determine, what is it that makes up the images. So, for example, they used X-ray fluorescence as a spectral test. And that is a test that specifically would pick up certain metallic pigments that were known. So, for example, iron oxide or red ochre is a famous medieval pigment. Well, that has iron in it. If the Shroud images were composed of that paint, that would show up on the X-ray fluorescence, and as would any pigment that contains a metallic element. That was not on the images. STIRP couldn't find that. In addition, they performed lots of microchemical tests and that sort of thing to determine if there is pigments or stains or dyes. There was nothing. They also performed tests for proteins. And they discovered there was no proteins in the Shroud's body images. And the reason that's important is because if you're using a paint, you have to put the pigments in a gelatin binder. And you usually use like animal products for that. So that would contain proteins. So if there's no proteins in the body images, there's no binder. And if there's no binder, there's no paint. So yeah, they performed. And in week 4, we're going to be going over that in a lot more detail, like all of the various tests they did to prove there is no paint. Yeah. Okay. And in terms of superficiality, like I said, we've taken tons of photo micrographs. Paint would soak down through capillary action through the fibers. It would not just be on the superficial layer. Just like any liquid medium, it would soak down into the cloth. So the paint can't be there. And when we look at the blood stains, which were liquid, those do penetrate the cloth. Okay, great. We would expect the same with paint, but that's not what we see. And then, yeah, the vertical alignment, it would be impossible for a medieval artist to even conceive of painting the Shroud images so that it would have wrapping distortions that allow us to realize it was a straight line vertical path from the body to the cloth. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. The traditional painting doesn't work at all. Everyone,
Follow-up question.
sure.
With modern day technology, I was wondering if it were somehow possible to replicate that kind of imagery, where it's coming from the imagery has been produced from above or underneath. Has that been done?
So yes and no. So yes, there have been multiple experiments with various types of radiation. So one of the most famous scientists is a guy named Paulo de Lazaro, and he's published several papers in peer-reviewed science journals using ultraviolet radiation. And that does seem to create images that are similar from a chemical perspective to the Shroud images in terms of the straw yellow color and that sort of thing. But even there, they don't reproduce all the features of the Shroud. So for one thing, he's struggling with image superficiality because he has to point his laser, his UV thing at the cloth for a fraction of a second. And if he's just off by a little bit, it penetrates through the cloth. So he's been struggling with trying to create, images that are superficial. and stuff, but we can reproduce some features through things like that. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions or good to go? All right. So let's look at a different mechanism. So another artistic technique is the scorch hypothesis, right? So you have a metal statue or a bas-relief, you put the cloth over it, and then the artist will heat the statue to scorch the images on the cloth. How does this perform? Well, it fails on 4 fronts. Number one, it fails to account for uniformity because it would require an outstanding amount of temperature control to create frontal and dorsal images that have the same uniform intensity of color. And there have been scientific experiments using heated statues and bas-reliefs, and there's always non-uniformity that comes up, especially if there's imperfections in the metal instruments or the statue or the bas-reliefs themselves. It's impossible to picture some perfect metal statue that can conduct the heat perfectly uniformly throughout the entirety of a full-length front and backside cloth. It just, even with modern technology, scientists haven't been able to do it. In terms of superficiality, look, this is another failure here too, because kind of what I was just saying to Eden there, with the scorch, there's this problem of you want it to be just on the superficial layer, but they've calculated out, look, if you want to create the body image superficiality of the shroud with the scorch, then you have to put the shroud onto the heated metal statue for 1/100th of a second and take it off. 1/100th of a second. Human beings can't do that. Otherwise, you will scorch right through the cloth. And I have a helpful 2-minute video clip to kind of help you guys visualize what I'm saying there. So let me just show that. Where's my mouse? Okay. All right. You guys are seeing the YouTube?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
The cloth.
So I used that, making a hot bas-relief, trying to impress that on the cloth. And yes, you can get some images that could have some pseudo 3-dimensional quality and also a high resolution. But the problem there is that to put a surface discoloration on the cloth, on the fibrils, heat will discolor through the thickness of the shroud in about, it's about 1/100th to 1/10th of a second. Mm-hmm. So you would have to have the bas-relief on the cloth and take it away on a time scale like that in order to be consistent with what we observe. So it just goes on and on. But problems that just don't seem to work.
To avoid this problem, some tests have daubed paint.
Okay, so that's kind of what I was saying there in terms of the problem, right? Like, you're not going to get superficial images. So some medieval artist wouldn't be able to put the shroud for 1/100th of a second on the heated bas-relief and then remove it before it burns through the cloth. And it doesn't reproduce the there's nothing that would create a vertically aligned thing. The images wouldn't be just created vertically aligned up and down. There would be, heat radiates in all directions, just like a gas will diffuse in all directions and stuff like that. So this is just another inconsistency. And here's where, remember I said there's no body images under the blood. So Reverend Sully was asking, well, why is this important? Well, this is important because this rules out the scorch hypothesis, right? So blood is more thermally unstable than linen. So this means, let's imagine the blood was on the cloth first, and then the artist scorched the images. Well, if that was the case, the blood is going to get scorched as well. There's going to be thermal degradation or thermal damage evident on the bloodstains. But no, when we look at the bloodstains on the shroud, they're pristine. They're in great condition. They're not damaged. So clearly that didn't happen. But then if you suppose the opposite, let's say the body images were scorched onto the cloth first, and then an artist, put on the bloodstains and painted on the bloodstains. Well, when the shroud scientists removed the blood through the chemical enzymes, there would still be this scorched image of the body underneath those bloodstains. You know, blood isn't going to remove a scorch or something like that. So this again rules it out. It couldn't be a scorch hypothesis because this feature of no body image under the bloodstains rules it out. Yeah, was somebody trying to ask a question or? No. All right. Is this sinking in or is it too technical? Just let me know. It's okay. All right, I'll try to. Okay, so next I come to the last one of the Shroud skeptics, and this is one of my favorite because I think it's the most ridiculous. But it's the proto-photo hypothesis. Not ridiculous, but it's the most out there. It's look, medieval people knew about camera technology. They had this technique called the camera obscura, and I just want to play my friend Barry Schwartz. This is a 9-minute clip. It's a little bit more involved, but he goes over the problems with this feature. So let me just play that 1 hour 1:30.
Okay, here's maybe my favorite part because this is
And you guys
really right up
my.
my.
You guys are seeing the video and hearing it?
We're hearing it,
No.
but not seeing it.
I'm seeing it. It looks fine.
You're seeing it? Okay.
Not hearing or seeing.
My alley. The Shroud image is a medieval photograph, possibly produced by Leonardo da Vinci. Now, but before I
there.
start this, let me first give great credit to Professor Nicholas Allen. Professor Allen took the initiative to create a camera obscura to do an experiment to demonstrate his theory. He hung a statue outside of the camera obscura, and so I give him great credit because unlike so many of these others who postulate ideas like Joe Nickel never actually made a scorched image, Nicholas Allen made a photographic image and did it superbly based on the techniques that he used. So I want to start by giving him credit for that. But let's talk first about what the camera obscura is for those who might not know. Basically, it's a dark room, and in that dark room, you'll see there's a small hole at the opposite end of the room, and there is a statue that's outside that room, out in the sunlight. According to Nicholas Allen, it took 4 days to expose his film, if you will. That film is on a piece of cloth that he had soaked in a silver nitrate, silver salt solution, because silver is light sensitive. That's what we used in photographic film and X-ray film. And so he created an image. The only problem I have with it right off the top of my head is that hanging a body for 4 days in the sunlight, you're not going to get the same result that you get on the Shroud, because it may start looking like a body at the beginning of those 4 days, but at the end of those 4 days, not so much. So, but I give him great credit. And Allen claimed that in the case of the Shroud, the sheet was coated with a light-sensitive photographic emulsion, primarily made of silver salt, and he used human urine to fix the image. Okay, uric acid can function as a fixer in the photographic process. To his credit, Nicholas Allen used this technique to produce a beautiful photographic image using a camera obscura and a life-size sculpture. This is his photograph, which he gave me permission to use in about 1998, I think. Picknett and Clive Prince, two British authors, not only agreed with Allen, but further suggested that this technique was in fact employed by Leonardo da Vinci to create the Shroud. So they took Allen's theory and sort of went beyond that. Now, Nicholas Allen, the one thing he didn't do is he never made a side-by-side comparison of his camera obscura results with the image on the Shroud. No reasonable conclusion can be drawn without just such a comparison. For example, Allen's photograph shows a strong directionality of light from above. There's a shadow under the chin, under the cheekbones, under the chest, under the hands. His knee and his feet are overexposed. His left arm is overexposed. So that's what you would get with a long exposure photographic image with a light source coming from above. You would get those shadows. Look at the Shroud, however. There's no directionality of light evident on the Shroud at all, in no direction of light. Now, The STIRP data proved, and Ray Rogers wouldn't let me use that word very often, I have to admit, but the STIRP data proved that the image on the shroud was darkest as a point where the body and cloth came in direct physical contact, and at the tip of the nose, top of the hands. The image grew more faint as the distance between cloth and body increased. And this result cannot be accomplished or duplicated using any photographic or artistic mechanism that requires some form of direct interaction between the cloth and the body. That's the only way you can do this. Now, here's an example. The cloth was lifted away from the torso. I mentioned this earlier, by the hands crossed over the torso. This lifted the cloth away from the torso itself. And if you'll look closely, you'll see that images made by light would not have this property. And you can see a kind of a halo surrounding the hands where there's more faint, the image around the hands is more faint of the torso. And you can see that lighter halo. And here, let me circle it. Within that circle, the background or torso of the body is much more faint than other areas of the torso where the contact was either more direct or closer. And again, you can see that here. Let me see if I can take that out of there. So you can kind of see that dark area around the hands. That's where the torso was further away and created a more faint image, and darker on the light, dark, reverse negative view. Allen's result also shows a very distinct and sharp edge around the entire image, which one would expect from a properly focused photograph. And he did a good job in that respect. But the shroud image has no distinct edges. The image at the periphery just fades away as the distance between the cloth and the body grew greater. The image grows more faint until it just disappears. There are no hard edges anywhere on the shroud's image. Allen makes no attempt to explain the blood and how it got on the cloth. So give the man credit. He did something that Ray Rogers and Al Adler, who used to yell at me, do an experiment, would be very pleased with. He did an experiment, and he just didn't go all the way to make the comparison that I've made to show that although he did a great job, he did not match the properties of the Shroud of Turin. So what I think, and here I'm going to talk about it, I guess, no light-sensitive photographic emulsion or any associated silver salts were found anywhere on the shroud. And we had highly sensitive spectral and chemical analysis. Our pyrolysis mass spec could, I believe, detect 1 part per billion with a B. Allen claims that the silver salts were removed completely when he fixed the image. However, the fixer in the photographic process only removes the unused silver not necessary to create the image. What silver remains on the image is what's responsible for the image. If it were all removed, there would be no image as well. The image would be gone. If the shroud were made photographically, we would have found silver everywhere on that cloth, and even more so in the image areas. Now look, Nicholas said that in at least one of his later attempts, that he actually took the cloth and soaked it in a silver solution, liquid silver solution. Well, that means it would have penetrated via capillarity through the entire cloth. And we'd have found silver everywhere. We didn't find any silver except for one microscopic little bead, tiny little bead of silver that may have come from the reliquary from the 1532 fire. We can't say that for sure, but that's the most plausible answer for that. And I just told you all that, so we can move on. By the way, not one example of a photographic image exists prior to the documented invention of photography in approximately 1826. And that photograph still exists. There it is. That was by Joseph Nicephore Niepce. I believe he was either French or Italian, I'm not sure. But that's the first photographic negative attributed. And of course, I got this from Wikipedia, so you can see the link there. And here is the peer-reviewed journal article, again from Applied Optics, the UV reflectance and fluorescent spectra of the Shroud of Turin. I also had Kevin Moran, may he rest in peace, apply, he had a VP8 image analyzer, and so we asked him to take a Nicholas Allen photo and put it in the VP8 and see what kind of results we got. We did not get the natural release of the human face like we see on the right there. the mouth is sunken, the chin is raised, the hair is raised, the chest is elevated. Compare that to the relatively undistorted nature of the shroud's facial features. That's what makes it significant, that the VP8 revealed the natural relief of a human form. No other photograph to date that we've tested that way does so. The shroud does. And that, to me, as an imaging guy, tells me there had to be some correlation between the body and the cloth when the image formed.
Mhm.
It's not a painting, scorch, or a medieval photograph.
So I think that's it on the medieval photograph there. But yeah, this is coming from Barry Schwartz. He's not a Christian. He's Jewish. I mentioned him last week. And he was the official Stirp photographer on the Stirp team back in 1978 that studied the shroud in person. So yeah, and his expertise is in photography. And he's saying this medieval photograph approach just does not work. Yeah, any questions about the proto-photo hypothesis before I move on, or? We're almost done. I know it's a lot today, but.
But so Dale, you're saying that Barry disputes this proto-photo hypothesis. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, he's absolutely falsified it. Yeah, so in that clip, he was saying, for example, the three-dimensionality, you saw the results. That's not the natural three-dimensional information from a human face. Everything's sunken, the eyes are sunken in, the chin is protruding out, the hair is sticking out and stuff. So, and it wouldn't create superficial images at all, right? Because his theory, do you guys understand what his theory was, or did that go by too fast, or?
Well, what he says, obviously you need to chew on it a little bit more. But for those who are arguing for the proto-photo hypothesis, they're saying what? That they had some form of ability to create an image like this?
Yeah, he's appealing to Nicholas Allen. He's appealing to this thing called a camera obscura technique. So you have a dark room, right? And you cut out a little hole in the wall to let sunlight in. And then in the dark room, he held up the shroud. The shroud is equivalent to a film because he soaks the shroud in a silver solution. And that makes it sensitive to light to create the picture on the cloth, just like film in a modern camera, in a film camera, right? It's coated in silver, and when you take that picture, that encodes the images on that film. So does that make sense? The shroud itself is acting like film.
Yeah, it makes sense. But what would be the purpose of those individuals to do it to this specific person on the show?
Well, because he's suggesting, he thinks that's how the Shroud of Turin's images were formed, right? The sun bounced off a body or a statue and went through that hole into the darkroom and then encoded the images on the silver soaked cloth, and that created the images, just like a film camera did back in the 1970s or something like that. So that's what his hypothesis is. But what Barry was doing was saying, well, look at the results. Number one, it's not a uniform image or anything like that, because you have all those spots. I should probably go back to so like number one, it's not.
And here's the paper.
So it's not three-dimensional, right? Like, look, this result is not comparable to the true three-dimensional accurate information from the shroud. Like, look, the mouth is sunken in there, the eyes are sunken in, the hair is like sticking up, and the chin is sticking up. Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
And in terms of the photo negative image she got, if I can get back to it, let me just move this. Well, do you remember he was pointing out, because I can't move that, but there is remember his image had like white spots and dark spots throughout it, whereas the shroud is uniform in its color. Well, that's based on the light reflecting down, because the sun is beaming down on the statue. So there's a downward direction of light, and that creates these shadows and then these white bright spots, like on the top of the feet where the sun is beaming right directly down on it, or on the arm, the left arm that's sticking up. So that's not uniform. You have these variations in the image color that I wish I could show you if it would, if I can move this. There we go. Right here. See, move this. All right. So yeah, you see the feet there. That's not uniform. That's bright white. Whereas other areas are darker. There's white, bright spots on the left arm. You don't have that on the shroud. It's all uniformly the same intensity of color.
Mhm. So Dale, Barry, did he believe that the image formed on the shroud was Jesus?
Yes, he did.
Okay. Did he become a Christian after, or did he remain?
So as far as I know, I think he remained a non-Christian. There are some people who question otherwise, but I'll just say this. Look, based on all my personal conversations, the last I had spoken of, he was not a Jew. He was not a Christian. So yeah, he remained an unbeliever until the end.
So okay, then one more question. What is his idea of what happened to the body that produced this image?
Quite frankly, he prefers to stick with Stir. He likes to go, look, I don't know. And he says, I stick with the primary peer-reviewed sources where the scientists actually studied the cloth. And he didn't want to go beyond that. So he really stuck with, this is what the science proved that we don't know. So that's where he stays, kind of thing, until there's more testing done or something like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Anyone else? No? All right. Okay, so we're almost done. I know this one's quite involved, but it is important, I think, right, to establish the miracle.
Yeah, can I say something quickly?
Of course, yeah.
Hi, everybody. So from what I'm understanding, looking at both images, the one that was locked away in a dark place has no form of light going in. So that's saying that is truth to that was what Jesus was wrapped in. Because he was locked in a dark area, so there's no light going in as what I was seeing onto the other image. So that's saying it's truth that is the cloth that he was wrapped in, correct? Because I'm looking at both images and that's saying, from what I'm seeing, there's no light at all.
The image at the periphery just
Sorry, yeah, I was trying to show you his method. So basically with the Shroud of Turin, it wasn't created using the camera obscura technique.
Right.
The scientific results rule that out. So you're right. In the tomb, how would there be sunlight reflecting
That's
on the
right.
body? It wouldn't, right? But with his method, he thinks there's, oh, it was in a dark room, and he cuts out a little hole, and that reflects off the statue and beams through the hole and hits the cloth on inside the room. But you know, that if you do that you end up with these kinds of results, which are just totally different from what we have with the shroud.
That's right. Gotcha.
Awesome. All right, cool. So great. So let's get into, well, how were the shroud images actually formed? And on this front, it can get very, very technical. I'm not going to do that, just to save you guys. I have a clip from nuclear engineer Bob Rucker, but I won't play it. It's up to you guys if it's too much. But essentially, look, we think the images were formed through intelligent design by God as miraculous images. And I showed you guys there are various theories, but by far the most popular, the one that seems to tick off all of the boxes scientifically, is supposing that some kind of radiation from the body to the cloth, emitted from the body to the cloth at the moment of the resurrection, is how those images got encoded onto the shroud. And I personally go for, so there are various versions, right? I mentioned Bob Rucker. Physicist Dr. Arthur Lind is another proponent of this. Dr. John Jackson, who was in one of the video clips. He was the head scientist for the STIRP team in 1978. Paulo de Lazaro as well. So there are many scientists that think this is by far the best explanation for explaining all of the shroud images and their remarkable properties. And it just so happens that it ticks off all the boxes, right? And it's been experimented on. They do create photonegative results. They do encode the three-dimensional information because it's from within the body itself. So that information is transferred directly from the body through whatever form of radiation to the cloth. And radiation emanates out uniformly. So it uniformly colors the shroud fibers to the same intensity of color. And it would only coat the superficial layer of the shroud, but that depends on what form of radiation you go with. And that's why I go with the charged particle radiation, because I think what caused the images were protons from within Jesus's cells. These charged particles or protons emitted from Jesus' body at the moment of the resurrection and went to the cloth, and those encoded the images onto the shroud. And protons, we know, would not penetrate the cloth. They would only go through the superficial layer or the primary cell wall. So this seems to get a green check mark on the superficiality. As well, now in terms of the vertical alignment, this gets a green check mark, but some shroud skeptics might say, well, wait, radiation, that goes out in all directions from the body, right? That it wouldn't be vertically encoded, would it? And if we're talking about naturally speaking, that is correct. But remember, this is a supernatural hypothesis. So we are supposing that the radiation was vertically collimated because it's a miraculous act from God. That's how you would encode the images. So that is an assumption on our part that's consistent with how the shroud images are formed. So yeah, again, it's a supernatural act. So this radiation is acting supernaturally. I mean, radiation coming from a body and forming images on the cloth in itself is a miracle. That doesn't happen naturally anyways. And of course, it would account for all the other features as well. So yeah, any questions about that, about the radiation?
So it was, wasn't it God who raised Jesus from the dead? But you're saying the radiation went from Jesus' body to the cloth? They're two separate things?
No, so what I think is that, okay, during a fraction of a second, Jesus was risen from the dead via a miracle of God, right? And part of that miracle involved this burst of radiation from his body vertically to the cloth, vertically up for the frontal image to the cloth and vertically straight down from the body to the backside of the cloth.
Okay.
And the protons imprinted this image onto the cloth. So that essentially, Reverend Sully, you tell me if you guys are up for it. Do you want me to play a clip from Bob Rucker kind of explaining some technical stuff about the sequence of events, or would that be too much?
How long would the clip be?
I think it's 5 minutes, something like that.
I think we could go for it. But before you do, Gail, well, when you read in the scriptures, you'll see that the whole Godhead is a part of the resurrection of Jesus. Just like the incarnation, you have the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit as a part. You have the same thing in the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So Dale, yeah, go ahead. If you guys are up to seeing a 5-minute video, I am.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah. And again, you don't have to understand every sequence now. Like obviously you guys can do research and stuff, but it's kind of just understanding that it's only that first instant that's supernatural, that instant of this vertical burst of radiation. After that, we can prove everything through the laws of physics as to what happened. Just like with the virgin birth. Okay, the conception was a supernatural miracle. but everything after that happened naturally in terms of her being pregnant and giving birth to Jesus. That all happened naturally, and you can follow that. So, all right, so let me bring up Bob. So this is Bob Rucker. He's a nuclear engineer, and his is the theory that I go for. It's called the vertically collimated radiation burst hypothesis.
So that the scorch was caused by heat deposited within this very thin region. And so what caused that? Well, electron flow in the outer circumference of the fibers. What caused that? See, so I'm going back step by step, and at each step saying, what caused that? What caused that? What caused that? That's how you follow the evidence where it leads. So what caused the electron flow in the outer circumference of the fibers? Well, an oscillating electrical and magnetic fields associated with the skin effect of an alternating current. So what caused this alternating electric and magnetic fields was an alternating electric current in the top fibers. What caused that? Well, it was a corona discharge between the body and the cloth, alternating between the body to the upper cloth and the body to the lower cloth. So this corona discharge was alternating between above the body and below the body. Corona discharge is like a miniature lightning bolt. You could call it a static discharge, for example. So what would have caused that? Well, protons depositing their positive charge on the cloth, alternating between the top cloth and the bottom cloth. So that's caused by the vertical collimated protons exiting the body. What causes that? Protons and neutrons emitted vertically. So where are the protons coming from? See, now, you can make this argument just for charged particles, but what charged particles are in the body? Well, primarily protons in the nucleus of the nuclei. And so those protons have to be emitted from the nuclei. Okay, so this comes into a little bit of background on nuclear energy. And so how would you get protons out of the nuclei? So they have to split. Okay, now it's interesting here. When a U-235 nucleus splits, it releases a tremendous amount of energy. But that's not the case, because if the body were converted into pure energy, then the strength of the explosion would destroy the shroud, the tomb, Jerusalem, and most of Israel. And that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So you need to ask which isotope requires the least energy to split? And the answer is deuterium. That's heavy hydrogen. Now, if I had the proper curve here at this point, I could show you the difference, but excuse me. Deuterium, when it splits, does not give off energy. It requires energy. It's an endothermic reaction. It's not an exothermic reaction. So that if you had nuclei oscillating vertically, that you would have, and that vibration were rapidly enough, excuse me, I'm having trouble. If that oscillation were rapid enough, then you would have splitting of deuterium nuclei. That's part of this hypothesis. And how many deuterium nuclei would split? Well, it would be 0.0004% of the deuterium nuclei in the body would split. That's how many nuclei you need to split in order to release enough neutrons from the body to shift the carbon date at the sample location up in the corner of the shroud.
Okay, so I think I can stop it here. And here's what I just want you to take. So look, I don't even understand all these steps in terms of the technicalities. I'm not a nuclear engineer myself, but what I want you to take away from this is, at least in terms of this presentation, is, look, it's only this first step. This is the supernatural miracle, right? The rapid vertical oscillation of the nuclei in the body. This is what pro-shroud experts are assuming happened at Jesus' resurrection. God did this bit, and then scientifically we can prove through cause and effect all of these aspects that would lead to explaining these shroud images and all of the features that we've proven about them. So all of this has been scientifically proven. It's just this bit that we need to assume. Okay, well, we know Jesus rose from the dead, and we're assuming that the shroud covered Jesus' corpse for the sake of argument, at least for now, until we get to week 3. And if there was this supernatural event, a rapid vertical oscillation of the nuclei in the body, then one thing would lead to another, and we can explain the entirety of the shroud images and all of their features. So this is the best explanation for the shroud images. And here I'll go to my last slide, but just putting it all together. Look, we tested all of it. The shroud images are not due to random chance alone. We've proven the shroud images can't be due to natural law or regularity, putting direct contact or gas diffusion from a body. And we've evaluated all of the known artistic mechanisms. It's not due to human design in the medieval period. Therefore, what is the best explanation? Well, it's the shroud images were formed due to miraculous divine design. And that's my presentation. So yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for listening.
Well, thank you, Dale. One thing that I gather from this whole presentation is that the shroud cannot be easily dismissed. You can't just say, no, it's not Jesus. With all the research and all these educated people and scientists speaking on it, there has to be some truth to it.
Absolutely. Are you still as convinced as last week? Are you more convinced, less convinced? I'm just curious.
I am very convinced. This session was very technical, but the shroud is technical. So I guess everybody here to understand that this is not something that we could just blow off or it's easily explained. There's a lot of technical aspects to it. So I appreciate and I like the fact that you're in all those videos you're showing, you're in them.
Yeah, these are all on my Real Seekers podcast. So like if you're wanting to get into the deep on this stuff, I do that on my show. But if you just are happy with the popular level, I will say this was the most technical of the presentations. Next week it'll be less so when we start looking at the historical evidences and that sort of thing. But yeah, when you're dealing with science, sometimes it is what it is kind of thing. So yeah,
you're right.
I have a question.
Right. Okay, so before you ask that question, Misty, I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.
And then I'm going to allow you to ask it, okay?
I don't know. I'm not sure why I'm going to ask, but why only the